The communication station on New Busan Colony hummed quietly in the early morning hours when the first transmission arrived. Dae-ho sat at his desk reviewing trade reports from the Outer Rim when his console lit up with an emergency signal. The young diplomat had been stationed at this remote outpost for 3 years, and most of his work involved settling minor disputes between human merchants and the few alien traders who ventured into this sector. The signal was unlike anything he had ever seen. The encryption was sophisticated but desperate, repeating the same message over and over in 17 different languages. When the translation software finally cracked the code, Dae-ho nearly fell from his chair. The message was simple and terrifying. "Help us, or we die." Yoonji rushed into the communications center when Dae-ho called her. The communications specialist was known throughout the colony for her ability to decode even the most complex alien transmissions. Her fingers moved quickly across the control panel as she began analyzing the signal's source and composition. "This is coming from the HFY system," she said, her voice tight with concern. "The signal is being broadcast on every frequency they can access. They are not just asking for help. They are begging for it." The full message took 3 hours to decode completely. What they found made both humans stare at their screens in disbelief. The HFY were a peaceful species known throughout this part of the galaxy for their advanced technology and beautiful crystal art. They had never been involved in any conflict that human records showed. Their homeworld of SciFiPrime was considered one of the safest places in known space. But something had changed. The message spoke of ships appearing from deep space without warning. These ships belonged to something called the Vextar Empire, a name that meant nothing to human databases. The attackers had destroyed 3 trading stations and captured hundreds of civilian vessels. Worse, they had sent a clear message to the HFY government: surrender completely or face total extinction. Dae-ho contacted Commander Tae-min immediately. The commander of the Colonial Defense Force was a veteran of the Mars Rebellion and had spent his entire career preparing for threats to human colonies. He had never expected to receive a request for help from an alien species. "Are you certain this message is genuine?" Tae-min asked as he reviewed the decoded transmission. "The HFY have never requested military assistance from anyone. Their neutrality agreements with every major power in this sector go back centuries." Yoonji pulled up additional data she had gathered from the signal analysis. "Commander, I have been monitoring subspace communications from that region for the past week. There has been a complete blackout from 3 HFY systems. No trade broadcasts, no navigation beacons, nothing. Something is definitely happening out there." The situation became clearer when Ji-won arrived at the command center. The xenobiologist had spent 2 years studying with HFY scientists on their research stations. She knew their culture and technology better than any human alive. "The HFY do not lie," Ji-won said firmly. "Their entire society is built on truth and cooperation. If they say they are facing extinction, then they are facing extinction. But there is something else you need to know about them." She activated the holographic display and showed images of HFY physiology. The crystalline beings were beautiful, but incredibly fragile. Their bodies were adapted for their low-gravity homeworld and peaceful society. They had no natural weapons, no aggressive instincts, and no military tradition. "They are not fighters," Ji-won explained. "A human child could physically overpower an adult HFY. They have never needed to develop weapons or defensive systems because they have never had enemies, until now." The true scope of what the HFY were offering became apparent when the full message was decoded. They were willing to share their most advanced technology, including quantum computing systems that were centuries ahead of human science. They offered access to their entire cultural database, containing the accumulated knowledge of a civilization that was old when humans were still living in caves. Most incredibly, they offered their entire planetary treasury, wealth that could fund human expansion for generations. All they wanted in return was protection from the Vextar Empire. Tae-min called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. The command center filled with officers who had never faced a decision like this. Human policy since first contact with alien species had been strict non-interference in conflicts between different races. Humanity was still new to the galactic community and had been careful not to make enemies or take sides in ancient disputes. But this was different. The Kethvar were not asking humans to join their war against old enemies. They were asking for help against something new and unknown that threatened to wipe them from existence. Young-Su arrived within hours of receiving Taemin's message. The Admiral commanded the 3rd Human Expeditionary Fleet from his flagship, stationed 2 jumps away. He was a man who had earned his rank through courage and decisive action, but even he hesitated when presented with the full situation. The political implications are enormous, Young-Su said as he studied the intelligence reports. If we intervene and save the Kethvar, every species in this sector will know that humans are willing to fight for others. That could make us targets, or it could make us the protectors of half the galaxy. The debate continued for hours. Some officers argued that humanity had no obligation to risk human lives for alien strangers. Others pointed out that the technology the Kethvar offered could advance human civilization by centuries. The quantum computing alone could revolutionize everything from space travel to medical research. But it was Ji-won who provided the argument that finally convinced everyone. She had been quiet during most of the discussion, but when she spoke, her words carried the weight of moral certainty. The Kethvar are not just another alien species, she said. They are teachers, healers, and artists. Their research into quantum biology could help us cure diseases that have plagued humanity for generations. Their cultural achievements could inspire human art and philosophy for centuries to come. They are not asking us to conquer their enemies or claim their territory. They are asking us to prevent genocide. The room fell silent as the true meaning of the situation became clear. This was not about politics or technology or strategic advantage. This was about whether humanity would stand by and watch an entire civilization be destroyed when they had the power to prevent it. Young-Su made his decision with the weight of history on his shoulders. I am authorizing Operation Lifeline. The 3rd Expeditionary Fleet will proceed to Kethvar space immediately. Our mission is to protect Kethvar civilians and drive off the Vextar forces. The orders went out within minutes. Ships that had been patrolling the outer rim received new coordinates and prepared for combat operations. Marines who had been training for colonial defense suddenly found themselves preparing to fight an unknown enemy in defense of alien civilians they had never seen. Dae-ho watched the fleet preparations from his communication station and felt the weight of what he had started. A simple distress signal had led to the largest military operation in human history. For the first time since leaving Earth, humanity was going to war not for conquest or resources, but to protect others. As the fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Yoonji received one final message from SciFiPrime. It was brief and desperate. Hurry, they are coming. The massive hangar bay of the assault carrier Seoul's Fury buzzed with activity as Captain Hai-jin walked among her crew. Mechanics worked frantically to prepare the atmospheric fighters for space combat, while pilots ran final checks on their equipment. The ship had been designed to support ground operations on hostile worlds, but now it would serve as the spearhead of humanity's first interstellar rescue mission. Hee-jin had commanded the Seoul's Fury for 5 years, leading missions against pirates and hostile settlements on frontier worlds. Her ship carried the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit, 1,200 of the toughest fighters humanity had ever produced. But this mission was different from anything they had faced before. The fighters stored in her hangar bay were built for Earth's crushing gravity and violent weather. They were thick, armored craft that could fly through hurricanes and dive into the deepest ocean trenches. To alien observers, they looked crude and primitive compared to the elegant vessels used by most spacefaring species. But Hee-jin knew what these machines could do when properly motivated. Subin gathered her squad in the briefing room as the fleet moved through hyperspace toward Kethvar territory. The Marine lieutenant had fought in 3 colonial wars and earned decorations for valor in each one. Her soldiers trusted her completely, but even they looked nervous as she began explaining what they knew about their new enemy. The intelligence on the Vextar Empire was limited but disturbing. They were described as a militaristic species that had expanded across several star systems through conquest and subjugation. Their technology was advanced, particularly their energy weapons and defensive shields. Most troubling, they seemed to view other species as either useful slaves or obstacles to be eliminated. The good news is that they fight like most aliens do, Subin told her Marines. They prefer long-range combat with energy weapons, They think war should be clean and precise. They have never fought anyone like us. The squad listened intently as she explained human military doctrine. While most alien species treated warfare as an art form with rules and traditions, humans approached it as a problem to be solved as quickly and efficiently as possible. Human weapons were designed to cause maximum damage, with minimum regard for elegance or tradition. Nam Jun worked 18-hour shifts in the engineering section, modifying human weapons for the upcoming battle. The fleet's chief engineer had been given complete authority to adapt their arsenal for combat against unknown alien technology. He approached the problem with the methodical precision that had made human engineering famous throughout the colonies. The modifications were brutal in their simplicity. Railgun rounds were loaded with depleted uranium cores that could punch through most known materials. Missile warheads were equipped with adaptive artificial intelligence that could analyze enemy defenses and adjust their attack patterns in real time. Most importantly, every weapon system was designed to overwhelm enemy defenses through sheer volume of fire, rather than sophisticated targeting. As the fleet traveled through hyperspace, reports continued to arrive from HFY space. The news grew worse with each transmission. Entire civilian populations had been evacuated from border worlds as Vextar forces advanced. The few HFY defense vessels that attempted to resist were destroyed so quickly that they barely had time to send distress signals. Kyung-soo spent his time in the intelligence section, analyzing intercepted Vextar communications. The fleet's intelligence officer had a talent for understanding alien psychology, and what he learned about their enemy was both useful and disturbing. The Vextar seemed genuinely puzzled by the idea that anyone would come to help the HFY. Their intercepted messages spoke of the crystal beings as weak and worthless, suitable only for slavery or elimination. They expressed confusion about reports of human ships moving toward the conflict zone, dismissing the possibility that any species would risk war to protect strangers. More troubling were the references to humans themselves. The Vextar intelligence reports described humanity as a primitive species that had barely achieved interstellar travel. They dismissed human weapons as crude kinetic devices that would be useless against advanced energy shields. One captured transmission referred to humans as soft-skinned primitives who still use chemical explosives. The fleet made its final preparation stops at 3 different staging areas to coordinate the assault. Ships that had been scattered across human space came together into the largest military formation in human history. Destroyers, cruisers, and assault carriers formed up in battle groups that stretched across thousands of kilometers of space. At the first staging point, Young-soo met with his squadron commanders to finalize the battle plan. The admiral had fought in the war against the Centauri separatists and understood the importance of using human advantages against alien expectations. "Remember that they do not know what we are capable of," he told his officers. "They have never fought humans before. They do not understand how we think or how we fight. That is our greatest weapon." The plan was simple but devastating. Human forces would not engage in the prolonged ceremonial combat that most alien species preferred. Instead, they would strike with overwhelming force and speed, using tactics designed to break enemy morale as much as enemy ships. At the second staging point, additional supplies and reinforcements joined the fleet. Medical ships arrived carrying experimental treatments for potential alien toxins. Supply vessels brought extra ammunition and spare parts for the modified weapon systems. Most importantly, specialized communication equipment arrived that would allow human forces to coordinate with any surviving HFY defenders. The final staging point was only 6 hours from HFY space. Here, the fleet received its last intelligence update from deep space reconnaissance drones. The news was grim but not unexpected. Vextar forces had begun their final assault on SciFiPrime. The HFY homeworld was defended by only a handful of civilian vessels that had been hastily converted for combat. Hyojin made her final rounds through the Soul's Fury as the fleet prepared for its last hyperspace jump. In the hangar bay, her pilots were strapping themselves into fighters that had been modified for the brutal reality of space combat. In the Marine quarters, Subin's soldiers were checking equipment that was designed for the kind of close quarters fighting that most aliens considered impossible. The contrast between human and alien military philosophy was evident in every aspect of the fleet's preparation. Where most species would spend days on elaborate battle rituals and formal declarations of war, the humans focused entirely on practical concerns. Weapons were tested and retested. Communication systems were synchronized. Medical teams prepared for casualties. Namjoon ran final diagnostics on the weapon modifications as the fleet approached the hyperspace jump point. His railguns could fire solid projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. His missiles carried enough explosive force to crack a small moon. His defensive systems were designed not to deflect enemy fire, but to absorb it while delivering devastating counterattacks. The most unsettling aspect of the intelligence reports was how confident the Vextar seemed about their victory. Their communications showed no concern about potential human intervention. They referred to the approaching human fleet as a minor curiosity that would be dealt with after they finished exterminating the Kethvar. Young-Soo read the final intelligence summary as the fleet prepared to jump. The Vextar had committed their entire available force to the assault on SciFiPrime. They were not holding any reserves or preparing for unexpected complications. They expected the battle to be over before any help could arrive. As the jump countdown reached its final seconds, reports arrived indicating that Vextar forces had begun bombardment of civilian targets on the Kethvar homeworld. The elegant, crystal cities that had stood for thousands of years were being systematically destroyed. Millions of innocent beings were dying while their killers treated the slaughter as routine military operation. The fleet jumped to hyperspace with a cold fury that would have surprised any alien observer. Humans might be newcomers to the galactic community, but they had very definite opinions about bullies who attacked defenseless civilians. The Vextar Empire was about to learn why Earth had produced the most dangerous soldiers in known space. When the human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Velthara system, they would find a battle in progress. But it would not be the kind of battle the Vextar expected. It would be the kind of battle that humans had been perfecting since they first picked up rocks to defend their caves. It would be brutal, decisive, and absolutely merciless. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Velthara system to witness a massacre in progress. Through the viewports of their ships, the crews could see the beautiful blue-green world of the Kethvar homeworld, surrounded by the elegant crystalline vessels of the Vextar Empire. Bright flashes of energy weapons lit up the darkness as alien ships systematically destroyed everything in their path. Young-Soo stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the slaughter through his tactical display. Dozens of Kethvar civilian vessels were being hunted down and destroyed by Vextar warships. The alien attackers moved with a ceremonial precision that spoke of practiced genocide. They were not simply conquering the system. They were erasing every trace of Kethvar civilization. The communication channels were filled with desperate pleas for mercy in the crystalline voices of the dying Kethvar. But the Vextar responded only with demands for complete surrender broadcast between each wave of destruction. It was clear that they intended to leave no survivors. Minho watched the carnage from the bridge of his destroyer Inchin's blade and felt a cold rage building in his chest. The captain had fought pirates and separatists throughout his career, but he had never seen anything as coldly systematic as this extermination. The Vextar were not just killing their enemies, they were making sure that future generations would never know the Kethvar had ever existed. Through his ship's sensors, Minho could see the Vextar vessels moving in perfect formation. Their ships were works of art, smooth and graceful with energy shields that shimmered like soap bubbles around their hulls. They fought with the kind of precision that spoke of thousands of years of military tradition. Every movement was calculated. Every shot was measured. Every action followed ancient protocols of warfare. It was exactly the kind of fighting that humans had been designed to destroy. Young-Soo opened a communication channel to all ships in the fleet. His voice was calm and controlled, but every human who heard it knew that they were about to unleash something that the galaxy had never seen before. All ships. This is Admiral Young-Soo. The enemy is currently engaged in the systematic extermination of civilian targets. We will not permit genocide to occur while human forces are present. All ships are authorized to engage with maximum force. Show them why we are called Deathworlders. The first human attack came from Hyejin's fighter squadrons. The Soul's Fury launched every atmospheric fighter in its hangar bay, sending them, screaming toward the nearest Vextar formation. The pilots had trained for this moment their entire careers, but none of them had ever expected to fight for alien civilians they had never met. Wu Jin led the first squadron directly into the heart of the Vextar fleet. The young pilot had grown up on Mars, where the thin atmosphere and reduced gravity made flying a constant challenge. His fighter was built for the hurricanes of Earth and the dust storms of the frontier worlds. It was ugly, armored, and absolutely deadly when properly motivated. The Vextar ships detected the approaching human fighters and responded according to their military doctrine. They formed defensive formations and prepared to engage in the elegant long-range combat that had served their species for millennia. Energy weapons charged and defensive shields strengthened as they prepared to demonstrate their superiority over primitive human technology. Instead, they encountered something that their training had never prepared them for. The human fighters did not engage in careful long-range duels. They swarmed like angry insects, using overwhelming numbers and suicidal tactics that no civilized species would consider. Wu Jin's squadron dove directly through the Vextar defensive formation, ignoring energy weapon fire that would have destroyed any normal fighter. But human fighters were not normal. They were armored to survive atmospheric entry at terminal velocity and built to operate in environments that would kill most pilots. The elegant energy beams of the Vextar were designed to penetrate standard defensive shields, not the brutal armor plating that protected human pilots from their own homeworld. The first Vextar ship to die was destroyed by a tactic that violated every rule of civilized warfare. Wu Jin's wingman flew his damaged fighter directly into the alien vessel's engine section, detonating his remaining missiles in a kamikaze attack that vaporized both ships. The explosion was so unexpected that nearby Vextar vessels were caught in the blast radius. Dayun monitored the enemy communications from her position in the fleet's command center. The communications officer had trained in xenolinguistics and could understand enough Vextar language to follow their increasingly frantic transmissions. What she heard made her smile with grim satisfaction. The aliens were calling the human attack madness touched and void-born demon tactics. They could not understand why anyone would sacrifice their own fighters to destroy enemy ships. The concept of kamikaze attacks was so foreign to their military doctrine that they had no defensive protocols for dealing with it. But the real shock came when Subin's Marines launched their boarding assault. The Marine lieutenant had loaded her soldiers into crude metal pods that were fired directly at Vextar ships like artillery shells. The boarding pods smashed through enemy hulls rather than docking politely at airlocks. The sound of human soldiers cutting their way into alien ships with plasma torches could be heard throughout the Vextar fleet. The Vextar had never fought an enemy that was willing to board their ships and fight in the corridors. Their beautiful vessels were designed for long-range combat between civilized species. They had no internal defenses against armored humans carrying chemical explosives and projectile weapons through their own hallways. Subin led the assault on the Vextar flagship personally. Her Marines cut through the hull plating and charged into the ship's command center before the aliens could respond. The sight of humans fighting inside their own vessel with weapons that fired metal projectiles was so shocking that several Vextar officers simply froze in terror. The battle inside the ship was brief and devastating. Human Marines had trained for close-quarters combat in zero-gravity and hostile environments. They fought with weapons designed for maximum damage at short range. The Vextar crew, trained for ceremonial duels and long-range energy combat, had no answer for humans who treated their ship like a hostile cave to be cleared room by room. Within minutes, Subin's squad had captured the ship's command center and taken the alien officers prisoner. The Marine lieutenant looked at the elegant crystalline beings who had been systematically murdering civilians and felt no sympathy for their terror. They had chosen to wage genocide against innocents. Now they would learn what it meant to fight humans. The psychological impact of the boarding action rippled through the entire Vextar fleet. Da-Un intercepted communications that spoke of madness touched primitives and void-born demons who fought without honor or sanity. The aliens could not comprehend an enemy that would fight inside their own ships with weapons that could damage their own vessel. Minho coordinated the destroyer assault on the remaining Vextar formations. His ship and 5 others moved in perfect coordination, using human pack-hunting tactics that overwhelmed alien defensive systems. Where the Vextar fought as individuals following ancient protocols, the humans fought as a coordinated swarm that adapted instantly to changing conditions. The Inchun's blade fired its railguns at targets that the Vextar did not expect to be vulnerable. Instead of attacking shields and armor, the human weapons targeted engine sections and communication arrays. The depleted uranium rounds punched through crystalline hulls like bullets through glass, causing damage that energy shields could not prevent. Namjoon's weapon modifications proved their worth as the battle intensified. His adaptive missiles learned from each exchange, adjusting their attack patterns to exploit weaknesses in Vextar defensive systems. His railguns fired solid projectiles that the aliens' energy shields were simply not designed to stop. Most devastatingly, his weapons operated on principles that the Vextar could not counter, because they had never encountered kinetic weapons designed for maximum destruction. The turning point came when Young-Soo ordered the deployment of human, psychological warfare tactics. Instead of simply destroying enemy ships, the human fleet began broadcasting recordings of the battle directly to the surviving Vextar vessels. The aliens were forced to watch their own ships being torn apart by tactics they could not understand or counter. The final Vextar formation broke when their commander realized that humans were not fighting according to any recognizable military doctrine. They were fighting like predators who viewed the entire battle as a hunting expedition. The elegant protocols of civilized warfare meant nothing to creatures who had evolved by killing everything that threatened them on the most dangerous planet in known space. As the surviving Vextar ships prepared to retreat, their communications were filled with references to humans as abominations and unnatural killers. They could not understand how any species could be so effective at warfare while showing such complete disregard for military tradition and honor. The first major Vextar retreat in their species' history began with ships fleeing in all directions, rather than maintaining formation. Their pilots were too terrified to follow proper withdrawal procedures. The Vextar Empire could not accept that they had been defeated by primitive Deathworlders using crude kinetic weapons. Within days of their humiliating retreat from SciFiPrime, their high command ordered a massive retaliation force to return and destroy the human interlopers. They convinced themselves that they had been caught off guard by unknown alien technology, rather than accepting that humans were simply more dangerous than any species they had ever encountered. The second Vextar assault force was twice the size of the first and included their most elite commanders and advanced warships. They brought experimental energy weapons designed to overwhelm any defensive system and deployed long-range bombardment vessels that could destroy entire planets from safe distances. Most importantly, they came prepared for the psychological warfare tactics that had proven so effective against their first fleet. Sang-Ho established his ground command on SciFiPrime as the human fleet prepared for the inevitable counterattack. The general had fought in every major human conflict of the past 20 years and understood that winning battles was only the first step in protecting civilians. His job was to coordinate ground defenses and help the surviving Kethvar rebuild their shattered society. The crystal beings were unlike any aliens that humans had encountered before. Their cities were grown rather than built, using quantum resonance techniques that created structures more beautiful than anything human architects had ever imagined. But the Vextar bombardment had shattered most of these magnificent buildings, leaving the survivors homeless and terrified. Boram worked with Kethvar engineers to establish supply lines using salvaged alien technology. The human engineer was amazed by the quantum manipulation devices that the crystal beings used for everything from food preparation to transportation. With minor modifications, these tools could be adapted to human military needs and provide capabilities that human technology could not match. The cooperation between humans and Kethvar revealed interesting similarities between the two species. Both races valued innovation and adaptability over rigid tradition. Both were willing to experiment with new technologies and techniques to solve immediate problems. Most importantly, Both species understood that survival sometimes required abandoning old methods in favor of whatever worked. Dr. Yansu treated wounded from both species in field hospitals that demonstrated the peculiar human trait of showing mercy even during total war. The medical officer had spent years studying alien biology and was able to provide treatment for Kethvar injuries that their own doctors thought were fatal. Her success in saving lives earned the trust and gratitude of the crystal beings more effectively than any diplomatic protocol. The decisive difference between human and Vextar approaches to warfare became apparent when the alien fleet returned, in force. Where humans adapted their tactics to exploit enemy weaknesses, the Vextar simply brought more ships and bigger weapons. They were fighting the same war they had always fought, just with more resources committed to the effort. Taemin coordinated the human response from his command ship, as Vextar forces deployed in perfect formation at the edge of the system. The alien fleet was impressive by any standard, but it was also predictable. They followed the same tactical doctrines that had served them for centuries, arranged in the same ceremonial formations that demonstrated their power and discipline. It was exactly the kind of target that human military doctrine was designed to destroy. The second battle began with the Vextar attempting to demonstrate their superiority through overwhelming firepower. Their long-range bombardment vessels targeted human ships with energy weapons that could theoretically vaporize anything smaller than a moon. Their advanced fighters moved in perfect synchronized formations that created overlapping fields of defensive fire. But humans had spent the intervening time studying captured Vextar technology and developing countermeasures for their weapons. Namjoon's engineering teams had created adaptive armor that could absorb and redirect energy attacks. More importantly, they had developed new kinetic weapons that exploited specific weaknesses in crystalline hull construction. The key insight came from studying how the Kethvar grew their cities. The same quantum resonance techniques that made their structures so beautiful also created specific harmonic frequencies that could cause catastrophic failures. Human weapons were modified to produce acoustic patterns that would shatter Vextar ships from the inside out. Jae-sung led the Marine assault that captured the first Vextar command ship intact. The young Marine had developed new boarding techniques that turned human psychological warfare into a precision weapon. Instead of simply fighting to control enemy vessels, his squads broadcast recordings of human combat operations directly into alien communication systems. The psychological impact was devastating. Vextar crews found themselves listening to human war songs while their ships were being invaded by creatures who treated combat as a problem to be solved rather than an art to be practiced. The combination of physical assault and mental warfare broke the morale of crews who had never experienced anything like it. Mi Young provided the theoretical framework that turned human combat effectiveness into a systematic doctrine for breaking enemy resistance. The combat psychologist had studied the mental patterns of dozens of alien species and understood that most civilized races viewed warfare as a ritual with rules and limitations. Humans viewed it as organized violence aimed at achieving specific objectives as quickly as possible. The difference was fundamental and insurmountable. When the Vextar encountered tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare, they could not adapt, because their entire military culture was based on fighting according to established protocols. They literally could not comprehend an enemy that ignored all rules except winning. The climax of the second battle came when Young-soo challenged the Vextar fleet commander to single combat according to alien tradition. The admiral understood that psychological warfare was often more effective than pure firepower, and the Vextar culture placed enormous importance on personal honor and individual prowess in battle. The alien commander accepted the challenge, expecting to face a human equipped with primitive weapons and crude armor. Instead, he encountered something that no Vextar warrior had ever imagined: a human who had been enhanced with fusion technology and augmented reflexes that made him faster and stronger than any natural creature. The single combat was brief and brutal. The Vextar champion fought with elegant energy blades according to thousands of years of martial tradition. The human champion fought with enhanced strength and combat drugs that eliminated pain and fear. More importantly, he fought without any regard for honor or tradition, using every dirty trick and tactical advantage available. When the Vextar champion fell, His entire fleet watched their greatest warrior being defeated by tactics they considered dishonorable and barbaric. The psychological impact rippled through their forces like a physical blow. They had been beaten not just militarily but culturally, by creatures who rejected every principle of civilized warfare. The second Vextar retreat was even more chaotic than the first. Ships fled without maintaining formation or following withdrawal protocols. Some vessels simply shut down their communications and jumped to random coordinates rather than report their defeat to high command. The most elite force in Vextar history had been shattered by humans who treated their ancient military traditions as interesting but irrelevant obstacles. Da-Yun intercepted communications from the fleeing fleet that revealed the full extent of Vextar demoralization. They were calling humans plague bearers and reality destroyers who fought wars that no civilized species could survive. Some messages spoke of requesting aid from other powers in the galaxy to deal with the human contamination that threatened all established order. The aftermath of the second battle established human dominance not just in the Velthara system, but throughout the entire region. Word spread through subspace communications that there was a new power in the galaxy, one that was willing to fight for others and capable of defeating any traditional military force. The implications terrified some species and offered hope to others. Young-Su received communications from 17 different alien governments within days of the Vextar retreat. Some offered alliance and cooperation. Others requested mediation in their own conflicts. A few delivered veiled threats about the danger of human military expansion. All recognized that the balance of power in this part of the galaxy had shifted permanently. The Kethvar offered not just their promised technology and resources, but something more valuable: legitimacy. Their endorsement of human protection gave other peaceful species permission to request aid without losing face. More importantly, it established the precedent that humans would fight to protect civilians regardless of species or political affiliation. The human fleet settled into long-term patrol duties around SciFiPrime while diplomatic teams worked to establish formal alliance structures. But everyone understood that the real war was just beginning. The Vextar Empire would not accept defeat by primitive Deathworlders, and other militaristic species would eventually test human resolve. The diplomatic negotiations took place in the rebuilt capital city of SciFiPrime, where crystal spires grown from quantum resonance techniques reached toward the stars like frozen music. Deho found himself at the center of discussions that would reshape the political structure of an entire galactic region. The young diplomat who had once handled minor trade disputes was now negotiating humanity's first formal alliance with an alien civilization. The Kethvar delegation was led by their high-resonance Kaveltar, a being whose crystalline body held the accumulated wisdom of their entire species. Through harmonic translation devices that converted thought patterns into sound, the ancient leader expressed gratitude that moved even hardened human soldiers to tears. The crystal beings had faced extinction and found salvation in the form of creatures they had never imagined could exist. The terms of the alliance went far beyond anything that either species had originally envisioned. The Kethvar offered their quantum computing technology, but they also provided something more valuable: knowledge of galactic politics that humans had never possessed. For centuries, they had observed the rise and fall of militaristic empires, while maintaining their neutrality through careful diplomacy and strategic irrelevance. That neutrality was now permanently shattered. By accepting human protection, the Kethvar had chosen sides in conflicts that had simmered for millennia. But they had also gained something that no amount of diplomatic skill could provide: the certainty that genocide would never again threaten their people while human forces existed to prevent it. Yunji coordinated communications with the 17 alien governments that had requested diplomatic contact following the defeat of the Vextar Empire. The messages ranged from desperate pleas for protection to carefully worded inquiries about human intentions. All recognized that a new power had emerged in the galaxy, one that operated according to principles that no established government fully understood. The most interesting communications came from species that had been subjugated by militaristic empires for generations. The Torvan had been reduced to slave labor by the Kethric's hegemony, The Pelmari had been forced to pay tribute to the Zarketh Empire for 300 years. The Veltine had seen their homeworld strip-mined by the Gextar corporate state. All of these oppressed civilizations sent the same basic message. If humans were truly willing to fight for others, they desperately needed help. The galaxy was filled with species that lived in fear of their more aggressive neighbors. The defeat of the Vextar had proven that even the most powerful militaristic empires could be beaten by humans who refused to follow traditional rules of warfare. Kyung-soo compiled intelligence reports that revealed the true scope of the political transformation that human intervention had triggered. For millennia, galactic politics had been dominated by a small number of aggressive species that used military power to control larger numbers of peaceful civilizations. The system worked because everyone understood that resistance was futile and submission was survival, but humans had shattered that understanding. The Vextar Empire had been one of the most powerful militaristic forces in this region of space. Their defeat suggested that no oppressive government was truly safe from human intervention. The implications terrified ruling elites throughout the galaxy while offering hope to their victims. The formation of the Galactic Protection Force began with Captain Hyejin accepting command of a joint human-alien fleet designed to respond to threats against civilian populations. Her first recruits were Kethvar engineers who wanted to learn human military tactics and human officers who were willing to adapt their methods for cooperation with alien crews. The cultural exchange was fascinating for both species. Kethvar. Technology could enhance human weapons and defensive systems in ways that pure engineering could never achieve. Human tactical doctrine could provide the Kethvar with defensive capabilities that their peaceful culture had never developed. Together, they created hybrid fighting forces that combined the best aspects of both civilizations. Subin established the first interspecies military training program in galactic history. Her Marine unit worked with volunteers from 6 different species to develop combat techniques that could be used by beings with radically different physiologies and cultural backgrounds. The results were revolutionary. Kethvar fighters could use their quantum manipulation abilities to phase through solid matter, allowing them to bypass enemy defenses entirely. Torvan soldiers possessed natural armor that made them nearly invulnerable to energy weapons. Pelmari pilots could navigate in 3-dimensional space with an intuitive understanding that amazed human observers. But all of them learned the most important lesson that humans had to teach. Warfare was not an art form or a ritual. It was a tool for achieving specific objectives, and the only rule that mattered was winning quickly enough to minimize casualties among the people you were trying to protect. Young-Soo established his headquarters on SciFiPrime as reports of human intervention spread throughout the galaxy. The Admiral found himself commanding not just human forces, but a growing coalition of species that had committed to mutual defense against aggressive empires. The political implications were staggering. For the first time in galactic history, peaceful civilizations had a realistic military option when threatened by their more aggressive neighbors. The Galactic Protection Force offered an alternative to submission or extinction. More importantly, it offered hope that technological advancement and cultural achievement could survive in a galaxy that had previously been dominated by military might. The first test of the new order came when the Kethric's hegemony demanded that the Torvan return to their slave labor obligations. The spider-like aliens had treated the humanoid Torvan as property for so long that they could not comprehend the possibility of resistance. Their demand was accompanied by threats to destroy Torvan colonies if their slaves did not immediately resume their duties. The response was swift and decisive. Human ships appeared in Torvan space within hours of the threat being issued. Hyejin's Protection Force vessels took defensive positions around Torvan worlds while diplomatic channels delivered a simple message to the Kethrics. Any attack on Torvan civilians would be considered an act of war against humanity. The Kethrics attempted to call what they assumed was a bluff by sending a small force to capture a Torvan mining station. They encountered human marines who treated the action as attempted kidnapping and responded accordingly. The brief engagement ended with Kethric's ships fleeing after their boarding parties were repelled by tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Within weeks, similar confrontations occurred throughout the region as militaristic empires tested human resolve and discovered that the threats were not empty posturing. Human forces did not negotiate with oppressors or accept compromises that allowed continued exploitation of civilian populations. They simply appeared wherever genocide or slavery was threatened and made it clear that such actions would result in immediate military consequences. Da-Un monitored the changing pattern of galactic communications as the new reality established itself. Ancient trade routes reopened as peaceful species gained confidence that they could travel without fear of piracy or conquest. Scientific research programs resumed as civilizations gained access to resources that had been monopolized by military empires. Cultural exchanges began between species that had been isolated from each other for centuries. The transformation was not without opposition. Several militaristic empires formed an alliance dedicated to destroying human influence and returning the galaxy to its previous state of controlled oppression. They convinced themselves that humans were a temporary anomaly that could be eliminated through coordinated action and overwhelming force. They were planning what would become known as the War of Liberation, though it would be the oppressors rather than the oppressed who would need liberating from their illusions about human capabilities. But that conflict lay in the future. For now, the galaxy was experiencing something it had not known for millennia: the possibility that peaceful civilizations could survive and thrive without submitting to military domination. Young Su prepared his final report to Earth Command as the reality of humanity's new role became clear. His species had found its place among the stars not as explorers or traders or conquerors, but as the immune system of galactic civilization. They were the force that other species called when extinction threatened and hope seemed impossible. Dear Stamber, report concluded with a simple observation that would define human policy for generations to come. We have become what we always were, protectors of those who cannot protect themselves. The galaxy is full of bullies who prey on the weak. Earth has produced the cure for that disease. Subin stood in the training facility on SciFiPrime and watched a Kethvar soldier successfully complete a human-designed obstacle course, the ID crystal being moved with fluid grace through challenges that had been designed to break human recruits, adapting quantum manipulation techniques to overcome physical barriers that would have stopped any normal creature.